right, so this is gonna be, uh, like I said, it's kind of gonna be sort of casual. So I'm just gonna like start talking. We're just gonna get it on the road. Um,
Sure.
okay, so hello. Can you just sort of first off introduce yourself? What sort of got you into gaming and what made you want to make your game and introduce your game and your team?
Gotcha. So, my name's Danny, aka Proverbs. That's my alias. I got into gaming when I was younger, at 6 years old. My first couple of games were online games, surprisingly. And as a 6 year old playing online games, it kind of little off for that. But I started with MMOs like RuneScape, Ultima, Ragnarok Online. I played both Western and Eastern MMOs, and not just MMOs, but also other online games as well. But mostly MMOs were my always my favorite genre. And as the years went by, I kept playing MMOs and eventually forming my own guild at the age of 10. And I stuck with the same group ever since I was 10. Uh, you know, uh, Up until now. Now that I'm 28, I've okay. And then after quite a while of playing MMOs over and over again, there's a couple points I almost went like very serious in certain MMOs, but but there's always that little bit that kind of makes you like not like that certain MMOs. So after a couple burns here and there, especially with the looking at the market of MMOs, 4 years ago, it was really lackluster. So that's when I started. I said with a radical idea. I'm gonna try and make my own MMORPG from there. And I have a background in CS, so I do have a bit of knowledge in that department, but not it's not I'm not a game developer. I don't, and I'm not skilled in every aspect of what it takes to make a game. So I knew the challenges, and I knew an MMO is like a really difficult undertaking. And everybody told me, you're crazy, it's not going to work, don't do that. In my heart, I knew that if I were to make any other game, I would not complete it because I wouldn't have that same love and passion for it. So Astaria was born, and I started looking into how to make it. And after a year, I finally saw some progress. It wasn't good like or anything like that, but it was progress, and I knew that it was possible at that point. That's when I started really going really hard. And after 2 years, we're finally at a point where the game is playable. A lot of like the base systems that make an MMO are in, and I feel like this is a good point for us to go into early access where we can start, uh, you know, making Astaria. So that's how I guess Astaria is where we are today.
Okay, and who all is working on your team, and how many people are sort of involved in this in the making of the game?
Gotcha. So for majority of the game, it's just been me, and we do have one official person on the team who's a writer actually, and he doesn't really partake in much of the development other than the story and the background part of the game. Which, don't get me wrong, is still a really integral part of the game. But but aside for everything else, anything that I couldn't personally do was contracted out to contractors. So then that's how we developed the game as we went.
Okay, and so what's your motivation for making the game? What drives you to keep continuing to do this?
Okay, so the biggest motivation for making this game would have to be the lack of games out there that focus on communities, and I wanted to have a game where my community could play. The guild that I ran for a while, the same group, and I realized that there was nothing like that out there. So I wanted to make a game for not only me but my group to play, and that's what kind of drives me to make the game because it won't matter if a lot of people like the game or like if no one likes the game. As long as it's there for me and my group to play, I'm perfectly happy with it. And that's the driving factor behind it.
Okay, definitely. So, with sort of the background ideas out of the way, let's sort of get into a bit of the overview of what your game is focused on. So, can you just sort of talk about your design philosophy with how you wanted the game to function, what you wanted your game to be?
So the biggest design philosophy would be w- the world needs to be alive. The game itself has to be alive. That's a huge design philosophy behind what we wanted. And by alive, I mean when you log in, it needs to feel dynamic and changing, like not consistently, but enough to the point where it feels like you're a part of a world that can be influenced by your actions or other people's actions. And so that's what we needed to make sure to happen. In order to do that, obviously on an MMO scale, it's really hard to design, especially quests. You can't have every little bit of quest that each player does affect the world. So we figured the best way to do it is to make it so all the players are united and pushing and conquering territory, and that would be the way that it dynamically changes for players. And that's where our basis for the design. I guess our philosophy behind that is the world has to be alive and dynamic. That's the key factor there.
Okay, definitely. So, uh, we hear a lot of this in the MMO industry, especially now with games like Crowfall and Pantheon. So, what do you think sets your game apart from those games in terms of making the world feel alive and immersive?
Gotcha. So Pantheon, I think what sets it apart from Pantheon would be that Pantheon follows more of the classic kind of style, where you do quests and it's a lot more uh, personal in quest lines, but it's still static in a sense that the world itself is the same dungeon that you're going to run with your friends every day, and it sticks to that MMORPG I guess theme park kind of style. And then as for Crowfall entirely relies on its PvP community to be the content. And I figured, like, even though that's great for a PvP game, our game that lacks PvP can't do that. Even though players technically do generate the content in our game in a sense that it's community focused, and without the players, the game doesn't really it doesn't really dynamically change without players reacting to the world. So for our game, what sets it apart is the fact that I guess a developer is the one that's going to be behind the developers will be the one that be behind the decisions, the influences of the monsters. So whatever players do, I as the developer will be as almost as if I'm the overarching dungeon master of the entire game, and I kind of decide what happens based on the players' reactions. And with that being said, it kind of makes you feel like when you play the game, you know that there's like a human behind that monster that's attacking your town or something, and that feels a lot, that gives you that idea that the world's a lot more alive because there's an unknown variable that it's a human brain. No AI right now currently can really recreate that human interaction.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Definitely. I know you on the Steam page. You said a lot about making sure that this game has a large and functioning and living, breathing community. So, how are you going to encourage players to join the community when we're in the midst of games like WoW, where community is becoming less and less of a priority for people?
Gotcha. Well, the first thing I think is really important is the progression is tied behind community. So the progression is not so tied behind the individual player as a lot of MMOs are designed, where they focus on the ability for you to just play the entire game by yourself. And I thought that was really counterproductive for MMORPG because the game is about you interacting with people as well. So in our game, in order to encourage communities, progression in both individual and endgame is tied behind playing with people. So the first basis of that would be majority of the way you level up, you'll almost always have to party up with people. So the base of the combat is always like the open world itself. Part of the game is playing with people. So if you like in the other games, you only party up for raids or dungeons, but in our game we take that and just take it to the outside open world where everywhere you go, almost you have to party up. And then there goes the next level of interaction, and that would be guilds and large communities. And these are a big focus for my game because guilds kind of help breathe life into your game in terms of what happens. So guilds are really large powerhouses, communities where they can kind of help. They have the ability to push the front line in our game and capture territory. All players can actually capture the territory, but guilds kind of, with their large body, I guess, form the big Zerg that all the other players would get behind. But the guilds would then push these territories, and that's a level of interaction that's going to be needed, especially if it's like a territory that requires multiple guilds to capture.
Yeah, definitely. And that sounds exciting. And one of the biggest concerns or pitfalls I could see is the fact that when you have a game that's so focused on community, the whole community aspect can be sort of lost if the class design is not in place. So how do you reconcile the fact that you have to be in a community if you want to succeed with the fact that each class has to have a certain role and how are you going to design classes around that to make sure that every party can feel like they have a fair chance against the content?
Gotcha. Well, the first things first is I want to emphasize that in our game, currently, obviously, it's still being balanced and designed properly, so it's not it works as intended. Is that parties aren't locked to just 5 players and to a set system. A lot of games in today's MMO guards, it's the 5 player party with the one tank, 3 DPS, and one healer, and I feel like that's a very limiting thing to do. So we wanted to just avoid that and let the community decide. And by doing so, we designed the classes so you could probably mix and match main tanks, off tanks, and see how that goes and how that works. That way, you can do whatever kind of composition you think may work, and if it works, go for it. Other games encourage a set amount of tanks, a set amount of DPS, a set amount of healers. For our game, we wanted players to kind of decide that on their own and be more flexible with it. So, with that being said, that's what allows us to, I guess, blend the borders of party compositions and balance. Obviously, there's always going to be strengths and weaknesses of different classes and compositions, and it may, and especially in the beginning, we're probably going to see like a meta come out anyway, like a set meta for players to do, and if we see stuff like that pop up, what we want to do is redesign it so that meta won't always be the most effective, and add options, conditions, so other stuff would be viable as well, especially with classes. And one thing I'd like to touch on that is the class advancement system. It's not just direct power gains or anything like that. It's more like because you advance to another class, you have another set of abilities that you can add to your function that also works for another role. Not that they can fill that role completely, but they can kind of slightly add help to that role, which makes it so you can kind of have, like, let's say you have like a squire who's a main tank advances to a knight, which gets extra damage dealing abilities, right? And then let's say you lack a damage dealer, right, for your party. So then you'll just bring in 2 knights and then have them switch some defensive skills out for some knight DPS skills, and then now they can make up for that damage of one extra person, and then now they have a 2 tank, 2 DPS, one healer party. And the same system works for almost every class that we have in the game. It's just more like as you advance the classes, you kind of just pick a side grade upgrade to your kit and makes you more efficient as a player and kind of expand your capabilities more. No, we did that because we didn't want players to feel uh, like one player's way too powerful for me to play with them. That's something that we're trying to avoid right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, definitely. And with class design in mind, I also wanted to ask you about your design philosophy in regards to the versatility of classes and being able to switch out between certain roles. So I like to use the example of in WoW, the druid class is the jack of all trades. Where if you need a tank, you go guardian. If you need a healer, you go restoration. And so,
Under,
yeah,
Understandable in our game, and this is going to get slight backlash, I guess, and it may change in the future. Maybe we'll add another system to it, but right now, what you pick in the beginning is what you are for the rest of the game. So we wanted players to feel more like the decisions in picking that, lets you has a lot of weight behind it because of design, I guess design uh, uh, design limitations. If we were to make it too flexible, people wouldn't have that same weight of picking their class. It just wouldn't feel as good. And I understand completely where that references, because I actually dislike that. I dislike the fact that druids can just one day pay 50 gold and then all of a sudden, he's super tough and can tank. You know what I mean? It didn't really make any sense to me. So I wanted players to more so make decisions that really lasted on them and made them feel like they're building like a truly unique character. And if they wanted to like try something else, they could make a new character and do that with that character instead. But as people, but in order to sate, I guess, kind of sate the feeling of jack of all trades, we made it so players can kind of, as they advance classes, they'll get slight decisions on those side grids that I talked about, where you can kind of switch out abilities on your hotbar for that.
yeah, yeah. Okay, definitely. And sort of I guess the last question I want to touch on, the last topic I want to touch on in terms of class design, is the inclination for players to avoid playing roles like the healer or the tank, the more supportive role. How do you motivate players to play that more supportive role instead of just being
Definitely.
the damage dealer?
Yeah, definitely. Two key things come in there. One is definitely the appeal. I think a lot of games really lack appeal for certain classes. And I think if done properly, if you appeal the class properly, then people would want to play it. So that's what I noticed with that first is appeal. We're designing our classes so they're not your usual classes. We try to design them so we fill both the niche of like some of the stable that you know and some stables that you don't know. And we harken back to some more D&D style class names and such and class lore. And obviously, their class name and class lore don't really have much of an effect on their gameplay aside from some quest lines and such. But it helps the players feel that I guess that want to be that thing, you know, and that really helps with how people are encouraged to play support roles. An example of this is a plague doctor is one of our healing classes, and people that's actually our most desired class to play right now. Surprisingly, a support class. It's a mix of both DPS and healing, but you're mostly healing and supporting. But it comes in the form of like throwing grenade bottles at stuff, and that's going to be a lot of the gameplay for a plague doctor. Is you're going to be throwing skill shot AOE bottles at people. And I don't know about you, but I guess a lot of people are very attracted to that idea of throwing bottles at people. And so like I said, class lore really helps define people's want for that specific class. Now, with that being said, I'll touch on the second important part behind our class design is that classes in our game aren't going to be sitting there. They're not going to be, if it's a support class, a healer class, they're not going to be sitting there the entire time. An example of this is the combat system. Every class will have a form of attack, and every class will have some form of block. And with that being said, it means that you need to be actively fighting with your party, and it's encouraged to do so. If you're not fighting, you should be actively encouraged to be setting up combos with other players, or even supporting, buffing, debuffing, and you're doing all these kind of like strategies within your team. So you're not just focusing on healing entirely. And that's the slow time to kill in our game kind of helps add to that and not makes it so you're forced to mash healing buttons over and over again.
Yeah. Okay, great. And with that, I want to sort of move on to the problem that I see personally is uh, the this idea of player retention, where so like keeping players engaged in the game to the point where a lot of MMOs have this concept of the end game, and a lot of a big problem that I see in an MMO sphere is that the game doesn't really begin until the end game. So how do you keep players attached
Gotcha.
to Astaria as they're
Uh,
progressing?
to answer that question, I will answer that question right now. Astaria really truly doesn't actually have an end game. And the game itself, as soon as you start playing, is the game that we want you to enjoy the second you log in. Aside from maybe like a tutorial beginner quest that tells you how to play the game. And we want players to be able to do that by encouraging all the activities at the earliest levels possible. Granted, the higher levels unlock your ability to do, like be more efficient in traveling, be more powerful to attack certain areas. But like I said, the territories is going to be entirely based on the community. So basically, you feel more like a cog in machine towards a greater goal, and that is your end game, as opposed to your individual progression is your end game, and that's our difference there. The end game in our game is actually, based around the community. It's a community end game, I guess, is what you would call it, because end game technically would be like the server finally reaches the world tree and recaptures the world tree. I guess that's a slight spoiler, but that's where we'd like the game to reach. And when that happens, if the players do finally beat the world tree, an event will happen where for 48 hours or maybe 72 hours for 3 days, the all the territories resources will increase by like 4 times respawn rate. Monsters will come out that have high, really rare resources and such, and you can use these next 4 days to kind of like or 3 days to kind of like farm and get materials. And then after those 3 days, the server will shut down for maintenance and will restart and shoot up for like almost like it just reset from the launch day. And that will be the end of like I guess a season or like a campaign. And these campaigns are expected to last anywhere from like 4 months to 8 months. And when that happens, players will then realize that their end game, their progression just got reset in terms of territory and everything around them. It makes them realize that like they just won the first part of the game, And then when this happens, we potentially could switch it up. There could be a different type of enemy type, that faction that'll be spreading from the world tree or other places. There could be multiple factions, or even change the starting zone completely. Or we can even maybe design an entirely new region that players will start on the next campaign. And that's the I guess that's the fun part of the game, is that would be the end game technically, and it's not tied to a single player's progression.
Sweet, definitely. And so, my next question would be, how do you get new players to stick around for this big living community aspect, especially and I'm going to focus on especially those who are used to playing games like WoW, where a lot of the content is solo. How are you going to seamlessly transition them into this new play style?
Gotcha. So to answer that question, I don't think it's possible for me to seamlessly transition someone like that. It's definitely not going to be seamless. The first part is the way that players react, the way that players do things, especially guilds. Guilds are a big focus of our game. What happens with the certain guilds and player, even individual players to a certain extent, actions, these things are written and recorded almost in a sense that, like, if the guilds capture a certain territory that's like something that hasn't been captured for, that's never been captured before, that gets written into our lore, the story of the game, and that'll be on the website. That'll be within like maybe the next expansion or next region or next update, where NPCs or like stuff in the books are written, and players will kind of see that happen, and that kind of helps draw individual players in to want to seek that kind of same fame and glory, especially players from World of Warcraft or other MMOs, because that's one of the driving factors behind players is surprisingly fame. Like players want to be like the number one this, the number one that. Players want to influence that. That's one of the driving factors in terms of drawing new players in. The second driving factor is that the game is going to be made so it's not hard to get into. And by that I mean, uh, we don't want it where you have to reach a certain level to start playing with other people. There's actually one new design system that we're making right now that I haven't mentioned last time, is that aside from levels being very the power gain not being exponential as opposed to linear, uh, it's going to be linear. But we're actually introducing a new system where the average level within the party uh, will be the defining power and apply to anyone who's like a lot lower than the average level of the party. So let's say you have like two level 25s in your party, one level 20, and you're trying to bring in two level like fives, right? The average level will then be 22, and everybody who's lower level will then get scaled up to match the stats of those of the average level 22 or something. And that way, players can then still kind of impact these adventures with these new players or with the old players by and these new players won't feel like they're completely useless in a fight. They're still useful. They're still able to party with them. Obviously, granted, if you were to be at that level, you'd still be a lot more effective. But the ability to play with someone is just what we wanted to bring in, and that'll help with the player retention. Players will see that, and they're interacting with everybody from day one. I think that's a driving factor. Instead of level gating the communities into separate levels would really hurt our game.
And sort of piggybacking off this community aspect, I want to touch on the topic of logistics. You guys, and I quote in the Steam page, in order to travel far, players will have to manually travel to that location. In addition to this, they will also have to eat to keep their stamina up, to use bandages in between fights, etc., etc. How do you? What was your logic for designing this sort of system, and how do you make it to where it doesn't become frustrating for players who maybe want to travel solo, or don't really have the correct professions for it? So like if you don't have a chef, then you might lack the food that you need to keep your stamina up, that
Gotcha.
type of thing.
Okay, so the first and foremost is the food system. We wanted to make it so it's impactful, but not annoying. So let's say if you are traveling somewhere and you have food, or you run out of food, you're not going to necessarily die. You will get a massive debuff that kind of really says, "Hey, you should probably eat some food soon, or you're not going to last long." You know what I mean? And by lasting long, we didn't want to make it where it's a timer that you die with no food. We want to make it so you get in a fight, like more than one or two fights, you're probably going to die. We'll probably make it so you don't receive any more healing. Some kind of debuff where it matters and it's not annoying. So but it really still strong arms the player to keep up with these logistics. As for the second part of players who don't have the right professions, We wanted to make it so, first off, NPCs will always sell it. It'll be readily accessible at a town. And so we want to make players feel like food is abundant. It's just how you carry it is not abundant. So that's one of the things. So NPCs will always sell like a lesser effective form of food. So you could always travel places with vendor bought food. It's just if you want it to be efficient and travel far, it may be best to look at player trading in the market for auction houses, and kind of see what people are selling. Active vendors who are trying to sell food. Maybe players who are also selling food who made food, and that's a thing I would recommend doing. And again, if you do want to pick up the skills, there's always that too. You can pick up the skill to cook.
Yeah. Definitely, and so my next question would be how does this concept of logistics affect the game on a larger scale? So one of the things that when I first saw this, I was both excited and a bit wary because like on one hand this could get annoying real quick, but on the other hand, you could have these situations where guilds have to like manage their resources wisely if they want to send a large party to combat some enemy
Yes,
battalion. You know.
yes, definitely. That's actually surprisingly. I think it's been annoying. It's got a really bad logistics has a really bad connotation behind it because of have been doing survival early access games, and it's like, oh, get food, and it's more annoying than it is fun. And the reason why it's more annoying than fun is because there's barely any interaction in those games. You know what I mean? So like in those games, it's like, all right, well that guy's got food, I'm gonna kill him and just take his food. You know what I mean? In an MMO setting, with towns and an economy and like resources, you're interacting with people for these mechanics, and that makes it a lot more fun. And at least in my opinion, I think it feels a lot less annoying, especially when you're in a party, you're traveling, and then you share your food with somebody. That's a thing, and that'll be able to. Players will kind of realize that and notice that, and that's kind of like a nice thing for me to do to you, and that kind of adds to that fun factor, that interaction between
It immerses you, yeah.
players. Yeah, and it really helps there. Granted, if this was a game where it was solo progression and everything was like done solo, you know what I mean? It can definitely be very tedious and annoying because there are players being forced into doing it that don't want to do it. So now for like if I were to play the game, let's say we start off playing the game and I don't want to cook. I'm probably not gonna. I'll be real. When I play Astaria on my own, I'm probably not gonna do it. But the ability to do it in mass and be like that guy that just makes food. You can literally be a guy that just makes food in Astaria and just sell it to people. You know what I mean? And then that could be your end game. You know what I mean? You're supplying the army that's pushing towards the world tree, and you're contributing to that goal. And so there, if with that kind of like ability to do that, players players will realize they don't have to do it because somebody else will do it. You know what I mean? And that logistics kind of allows weight behind not only territory but like equipment, uh, and reagents for casting and ammo for bows, all sorts of kind of like things. And that logistic really helps guilds kind of plan, and that is part of the gameplay, is the planning that goes behind these assaults and these pushes. What we see nowadays in games is that they removed that planning aspect away from games, from raids, from like partying, and we wanted to reintroduce that on a grand scale. We didn't want to introduce it on like a small scale. Like we didn't want players to feel like they have to do that every time they go out. But when there's a massive assault or massive offensive, we definitely wanted players to kind of figure out where are they going to store their food, where are they going to get their food from, is there any like repairs, that kind of idea.
Yeah, definitely, and that sounds great. And this leads into my next question, which I'm really excited about because with the idea of logistics, this makes crafting sound incredible. So how are you going to make what's your design philosophy with crafting, and as an extension, how is economics managed in Astaria?
So the very first thing I want to put out there when it comes to crafting and economics in Astaria is that like we wanted players to feel like they were doing that crafting profession, because in a lot of other games when you do crafting, you as soon as you unlock the end tier recipe, you just stop crafting everything else. You just only make the end tier recipe, and we wanted to avoid that. We wanted players to feel like every day, there's a demand for steel swords, so you want to, try and craft that to support the players. You know what I mean? Steel swords will probably be one of the most durable weapons in arm and sets, or steel weaponry and armor. That'll be one of the more durable sets in Astaria. So that's like a high demand, and that's like a mid tier, low tier kind of weapon. So we wanted to, instead of make it like a tier system where you progress to the highest tier and only make that, we want to make a pyramid system where you only really craft high end items when like a guild comes to you and demands it from you and supplies you with the resources to make it. And same thing with excuse me, same thing with like the low tier weapons is that like you'll be able to gather resources to make these low tier, mid tier by yourself, but there's no way you're gonna be able to get the end game stuff and continuously produce those kind of resources, produce weapons like that. So that's an example of demand, how that plays into the economy, because there's always a demand for it with especially with a loot drop on death. When players die with like their steel weaponry, they're going to need to get a replacement. So each player is expected to run like a couple sets of what they have in storage, or like if they die, they definitely need to go get a replacement. So with that being said, demand for almost every aspect of crafting will always be high. And so that's where crafting is going to be an important aspect of the game. Other games, these kind of logistics are have been either kind of teased, I guess, and then just removed because they didn't want to do it anymore, or they just don't stay true to that philosophy of design. And I dislike that. I really want the weight of items to be there. Like I want you to feel that weight of crafting like just a regular gray item. Like a regular white chainmail needs to have weight. So, and I hate games where it's like, oh, now you have the most legendary recipes. You're only making that. It it takes away from the immersion. It takes away from the weight of the game, and it makes you as a crafter feel less of a crafter. And so in our game, crafted items will always be the most efficient game. The most efficient. So that's always going to be a thing. And also technology was what I call it, or I guess tier sets. I guess is always going to be locked behind territories. So let's say you only have access to like everybody only has access to steel weaponry in the beginning. You know what I mean? That's like probably the highest you can get to, and that's if you get the recipes for it. And then after that, everything out there is going to be locked behind ruins for knowledge, hidden books, certain areas. And then once guilds unlock these areas, when I was talking about the community progression, crafters will then kind of figure out what's the best way to gather these resources. Not only gather resources, but there's a limited amount of resources. So you're not mass producing the next tier all the time. There's always that. And then the way the crafting system will work, we're going to make it so it's not too like, I guess I want to say like not too bad in terms of like detail and how hard it is to make an item, but we want to make it where like you just spent like 45 minutes to like make a one item, and we wanted that feeling that like wow, that was pretty fun and difficult, as opposed to like other games where to make one item it takes me like maybe 5 to 10 minutes, maybe tops, and I really want to keep that gameplay there for the crafter. That way, you know, if you were a crafter and I was just a regular frontline kind of player, we'd have almost two totally separate Astaria experiences. You know, I'm always at the front line. I'm going back to town and I'm buying gear from a supplier. It could be you, and you're always going for resources. Making supply runs to like territory that's already been captured, mining it, and then coming back, and then looking on the market for more resources to buy, trying to make money to do that, and then making gear, and then selling it, and then doing the same thing right there. That's your gameplay loop. While my gameplay loop is pushing the front line. You know what I mean? Going back to you to get my weapons repaired. It's that kind of death and difference in gameplay.
And so, with that, we sort of with these questions, I think we've sort of established the need for crafting, and the logistics sort of also gives you the need for guilds to actually manage their resources and manage what people they're buying their crafted items from. So the next step in that is the reason for managing all these aspects of the game, and I want to reconcile that with what you guys call the liberation system and Warlord AI. So how do you guys what's you guys' reason for designing this game around territories and intelligent, difficult to beat AI?
Okay, so the first thing with the liberation system was there need to be some kind of like mechanic that players can lose cities and such, and it need to be defined properly and handled by a system. I don't. If we didn't have that system, I'd have to manually go in and delete the monsters when when the players capture a territory, or I have to manually go in, delete NPCs, and replace them later when they lose or recapture it. You know what I mean? And so we need to have some kind of set defined system that automates that system for me. And so, with that being said, the liberation system would be the next best thing, and it's been influenced by other games like PlanetSide. So certain territories will have their own unique area and maybe its own unique capture mechanic, and so we needed to have that. We need to have that automated, definitely. And with that being said, a territory capture system kind of helps dynamically change and make you feel like your actions are impacting the world. Because a lot of games say that, but they don't actually do it. You know what I mean? They say that, oh, your actions impact the world, but you don't ever see it. And I figured the liberation system would be the best thing to kind of make you feel like you're contributing to that overall goal. And you visually see it on a map. You visually see it in the lands that you travel. Like one area that you're traveling in, is monster free or something, and then the next day it could be under contest. It's in contested, status because of an invading orc army, and now that road is dangerous to travel. You know what I mean? And you didn't know that the day before. Like that. That's the kind of alive feeling that we wanted. Aside from that, now in the Warlord system, we needed the monsters to kind of not be dull. You can't have dull monsters in a game that's so focused on PvE. So, with that being said, the Warlord system handles two aspects. One, it's on the party level, which will be our first. They'll come out. Our first iteration of it will come out in summer. Is where the monsters will be more alive and interactive. They'll interact with each other and the players during combat. So they'll, let's say one monster gets low. The a nearby monster will try to heal him. You know what I mean? And then, if with that being said, the a member of that monster's party will try to crowd control you as well, and then try to stop you from getting to the healer that's trying to get a heal off. And this makes combat a lot more interactive and feel like you're fighting, not just a meat bag that's going to hit you like every 3 seconds. And so we wanted players to really strategize more so on that end than the stats than stats and levels. And I feel like a lot of MMOs remove that player interaction and that monster interaction by just making it so it's just stats and DPS numbers. So we wanted to remove that, and by doing so, it allowed us to allow players' skills and knowledge to affect the outcome of a fight more than their stats.
Yeah. So so uh, so let's for a second disregard the players who care about renown and fame and lore in the story. How do you motivate players to actually participate in capturing territories if they don't care about renown? What do you gain from capturing a territory?
Okay, so what do you gain from capturing a territory? As soon as you capture a territory, obviously the darkness is not in that territory anymore. So it allows crafters to go out into that area and freely gather resources. That's probably the biggest one. A second is when you capture a territory, anyone who's in that area or near it will receive not only like a large XP sum, but also like small resources being sent to them every so often. So for a certain amount of time, as long as you control that territory, everybody on the server gets a certain amount of resource in their mail. It's going to be really small, especially when we're balancing at first. And then whoever is actively there gathering it gets a lot more, obviously. And that kind of motivates everybody on the server, even if you don't really care about the territory captured. You kind of individually benefiting from capturing that territory. With that being said, it's also not just what you're benefiting, but it's also what you're not getting anymore. You know what I mean? So, like, let's say you lose territory here, you're not going to get any more, I guess, fade leaf. Let's just use that as an example, fade leaf. And then if you don't get that, then the market for antidotes is going to go down. There's not enough antidotes. And then with no antidotes, you're not going to be able to, attack the green forest, the emerald forest, because there's a lot of monsters in there that use poison attacks. And so without that poison antidote, you're not going to be able to, venture that far in that area. And so with that kind of like, I guess, interaction between both the community and individual players should kind of care what territories are being attacked and what's being defended and what's being lost and captured, because there's an overall effect from losing and gaining to everybody on the server.
Yeah. And definitely that, and I feel like that makes the game feel a lot more alive and immersive.
Definitely, and you gotta, and that's the goal was to, like I said, the philosophy behind that was getting people to realize that like interacting with the community is like one of the key elements there.
And with that, I kind of want to transition into one of the
Oh,
aspects. Oh,
sorry
sorry.
to interrupt. I just realized I forgot about the second part of the Warlord AI system.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
definitely.
the second part of the Warlord AI system is actually the overall the overall direction that certain control goes. So the second part is not just the party system, but like the the overall faction control, I guess you could say. Like it's almost like an AI in a real time strategy game. It controls the individual parties that roam around, scouting, gathering resources. Monsters will gather resources as well, and they'll have their own form of like supply caches, resource trains, and such. And that's what's going to be managing that is that overall StarCraft kind of level of AI controlling everything. And we want it to have the ability to dynamically change that AI faction. And so by doing so, it'll change. Like we set it to passive behavior because there's not a lot of players online. That's one of the things that we wanted balance was if like a certain time where it's not prime time, the AI won't be aggressive. They won't try to. You can't lose territory that way. We'll set it so they won't invade territory. Um, they'll defend territory, but they won't invade. And then at certain times they'll be aggressive because it's prime time. There's a lot of players on that can come to defend it. And then another thing about that is we can then dynamically change how they act and interact with both the players and the world itself with the events unfolding. And then that'll also help tie in with how I, as a developer, sometimes maybe I'll take control directly of a faction and move around and direct them what to do, and to a point where there's an ability right now that where even a developer or GM can take control of monsters directly and make them do specific things.
And yeah, that was going to be my next question. It's the aspect of the game that I know that and a lot of people who check this game out are going to be really confused about this player versus developer aspect. So please just just kind of
Oh yeah,
explain what this
gotcha.
entire thing is.
The best way to think of it would be more so that I'm playing the developer's playing a real time strategy game against the players, and the players are not the ones who are the real. They're playing an RPG using RPG against the developer. I guess that
Yeah.
would be that would be more so a good. But at the same time, remember I can also there's a way for me to directly take control of a monster and just run around and start attacking stuff if I want to. And I think that'll be pretty fun. Not just for me, but for the fact that like some player in some level 5 zone or like some like low area was like, hey, what's up? And then all of a sudden like a demon lord spawns in the middle of nowhere, starts attacking NPCs. He's like, what the hell? That adds to the dynamics of the game. You never know.
Yeah. Okay.
But
And
yes,
yeah. And so, and also, we're sort of nearing 45 minutes, so I want to get these last kind of essential questions out of the way.
sure thing.
So, first of all, how are you going to manage the loot? So we've had a lot of controversy, and I know you're a big a WoW player, so you already know that for example, for Tuma Sargeras, if you wanted to get in, you had to have this certain eye level, and if you wanted to get into
Yeah.
and Taurus the Burning Throne, you have to have this certain eye level. So
Yep.
how are you gonna make it feel? How are you gonna make players feel that when they're earning loot or when they're crafting loot, it doesn't just feel like it doesn't feel like they're doing it to meet a certain
As a
requirement so
pyramid.
that they can.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Gotcha. Well, first and foremost, we wanted to design loot so it's there's definitely you'll feel it when you lose an item, and you'll definitely feel it when you upgrade an item. And we didn't want to make it so you item level was a thing. We didn't want it. We wanted to completely avoid that. We wanted to go with uh, gear being something that is going to be not only interchangeable, but like you're going to be going through sets and having sets in your bank, having sets here and there. And it's not about the game's progression be about won't be about what set you can get the highest tier set to go attack something. Granted, there's a benefit to that, and there's perks to bringing the best gear to a fight. But we didn't want that to be the thing because the main combat mechanics behind territory capture and combat itself, gear actually doesn't play that huge of a role if you think about it. And the only time gear does play a huge role is when there's a what we call a specific condition or a condition, and certain monsters will have conditions in order to kill. Uh, or to even hurt them, you might need to meet a specific condition, or like to like survive a certain mechanic they bring, you need to meet a certain condition. And these conditions can come in forms of either items, some kind of mechanic that players have to do, or some kind of like equipment that you need to have. And these specific equipments won't be like some high end gear. An example of this is like to kill werewolves, you'll need silver weaponry. Anything else aside from like maybe fire magic may not really affect them. And then with silver weaponry or silver armor, it'll allow you to kind of survive and fight them properly. So we don't. It's not that you need like an item level to go into a certain area. It's more like, do you have the knowledge? Do you have the not only knowledge, but do you have the the logistics supporting you, the items, the amount of players, you know what I mean? The backing of like I guess a certain amount of players to invade a territory, to capture stuff, to fight. That's what you want to be considering. And that'll change the whole item level requirements or doing things or anything like that. That along with the fact that power gain in our power gain is linear. So a lot of games rely on exponential power climbs to make the player feel like the weight of the item is affecting them, you know? So in our game, instead, the weight of the item comes in the form of like A, you can lose it, and B, like uh, what you're using is sufficient enough to a certain extent, you know. And the power gain of it, the actual stats behind weapons and such are actually not that much higher. You know, you don't really. It'll make about 35%, 40% of your power as a player, but your knowledge makes up for majority of the. Your knowledge and your ability to play the game makes up for most of it, the rest of it. And stats are just like stats are there, so you can definitely measure your growth in terms of levels and stats. But so it's easier to kind of I guess theory craft later on for players that like that kind of thing. That's why stats are there. But otherwise, the stats levels and the power gain of each individual player is not that much high. It's not that much higher than what you'd have at the beginning of the game. Like I said, the utility that you bring and the efficiency that you bring is the goal of what you're trying to do, and that's how we're gonna, I guess, alleviate the whole like gear requirement. We're not a fan of that, and I understand. With that being said, I definitely don't want to see someone with like, the first tier. Well, the first tier I think is bronze, and I definitely don't want to see with someone running around bronze at like some kind of end game dungeon, and then telling me that like, hey, this game has gear requirements, and I'm like, yeah, to an extent, every game has gear requirements. I can't make it so you're running around with a bronze weapon, man.
Yeah.
You can't expect to be effective with like. So, but yeah, that I hope that answers that question.
Okay, so that brings me to my second to last question, which is, in a lot of games you have a lot of ways to customize your character. You have a game like Guild Wars 2, where frankly, in my opinion, the end game is non-existent except for Fashion Wars, and so how are you going to get players? How are you going to allow players to customize their characters to make themselves look good? Where you like in WoW, you have the transmogrification system where
Yes.
no matter what armor you're wearing, you can always have a certain appearance, right?
Yeah.
So if every player is if the whole motif of this game is that players are going to have to manage their resources, and if they die, they lose their equipment. If a group of players die and they all have to start running around with bronze equipment, then it's going to make them sort of look like a bronze squad. So
Gotcha. No,
how do
for
you allow
sure.
players to customize their characters?
So right now in the works, we do have a way for you to change your appearance. Not like transmog, but like wear a costume on top of your armor. That's in the works right now. We're just not sure how we want to approach that because the whole weight behind gear immersion in the game it takes away from it when you have that cosmetic items. You know what I mean? That kind of take, like, for example, if you're level one and you buy a costume on somewhere, and you start partying with level one, then maybe it looks like really cool and really like hardcore, but you're like a level one guy wearing bronze armor. You know what I mean? The visually, you're kind of like it kind of lies to you. You know what I mean? And we're kind of trying not to. We're treading carefully with that right now. With that being said, there's going to be a lot of different armor sets in the game. We have a pretty good library of what kind of armors you have right now. They're mostly heavy, like plate and medieval kind of inspired, but we're kind of trying to stick to that style. But yeah, we're definitely trying to add in more sets, and as we bring in more content for the game, uh, armor sets that we bring out aren't necessarily the end tier armor set. Sometimes they'll be like side grades, so certain items that have slight stat bonuses, but are mostly there for cosmetic appearances. You know what I mean? Like a leather piece that has like another leather piece, they'll have like maybe slight stat differences, but like the main focus is that like it's two different looks of leather, you know? And so the players will then have a choice of equipping those kind of gears to make your customize your character just a little more, make yourself look a little different. Especially with I definitely understand what you're saying. I don't want players to like customize their character to the point where it's ridiculous, but we definitely want to understand the whole RPG of wanting to look your character to look unique. Um, but we what we're focusing on mostly is players looking unique as a group. And so guilds later on in the future, we'll focus on most of the cosmetic options. We'll go to, I guess, guilds mostly first. And then an example of that would be like when we bring out the ability to change wear like a cape or a banner or hold like a banner. We'll first introduce like an ability to put a customized emblem for guilds first, and then we'll see how we can introduce some kind of customizability for players as well. Because a lot of games like World of Warcraft or like other games, transmog gets a little ridiculous. First and foremost, and when you're trying to keep the game immersive, costumes and emerge, transmog kind of ruins that a little bit. An example of this was like I had a really heavy, high end item level in Legion, and then I transmogged my guy to look like a naked night elf miner with like a stick, and I mean, I thought it was funny and it was ridiculous, but I just don't want that. I just don't want that in my game, man.
Yeah.
I just definitely don't want that same ability and feeling in the game. So I definitely want players to kind of be a little more serious with their character customization. With that being said, in the future, you may definitely see some kind of like cosmetic costumes come out in both the forms of like a cash shop and within the game's progression tiers.
Yeah.
So we'll definitely bring cosmetic options for both. I don't want to be that guy that's known as a pay to win. Well, not pay to win, but like the I guess the douche developer that only brings cosmetics to a cash shop. You know what I mean? I hate
Yeah.
that. I don't know about you, but I hated that. Oh man, Black Desert Online was one of the games I hated that so much.
Yeah, definitely. And that actually brings me to my next question. How are you guys going to monetize the game? We've seen a lot of pushback with microtransactions in the past. So, what do you guys plan to do to make sure your game isn't a pay to win, as a lot of people say
Gotcha. So we're gonna allow players to beat the game through loot crates.
it?
I'm just kidding. I mean, that's a cash grab idea, but no, no, that's not, I was just kidding.
Yeah, getting
Definitely
some
not.
Battlefront 2 vibes here.
Yeah, open this package and you have a 0.1% chance to get to the world tree and beat the game. Yeah, no, we definitely buy to play, free to play was definitely I really want to try and do. I really do. But realistically speaking, unless I had like a really big budget behind me and like a 6-figure salary behind me with a lot of free time, there's no way we can make this game free to play, or even it's just not feasible. Because if we were to make it free to play, our design philosophy would have to change. First and foremost, our design behind some of the mechanics, we'd have to implement cash shop uh, and focus heavily on that. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to repeat the same mistakes as other games. So we're just gonna make it buy to play, no subscription, so that way you don't feel like if you after buying the game you don't feel like you're wasting time if you're not playing. And that was one of the issues with subscriptions is that like you don't feel like you're getting your money's worth. You don't play often enough with subscription. So we definitely don't want to do subscription. Buy to play is our first and for our best option for now, with a light microtransaction shop. And by that I mean like we definitely don't want items to be over $10 each. We want to keep it $10 max, and that's like max. We want to encourage like really small amount of microtransactions to make players feel like they're buying convenience, because convenience should only come in the form of like a couple dollars here and there, and then like you know what I mean. Convenience should never be anything beyond that. And a lot of games charge like they nickel and dime you, dude, for like inventory space and stuff. And I'm just like, yeah, it's not doable for me. And even then, like I believe in my opinion that like a lot of that stuff isn't going to even be in the game. Convenience may be more like I was just talking to a guild last night who was actually uh, good mix of opinions here on this. When the server if the players lose, which doesn't happen often enough, or I don't think it will happen. It may not even happen ever. If the players lose, then what will happen is uh, you'll if the players lose, they have like a certain amount of time to get to a portal, get their character to a portal, and they only need to get one character to the portal before you know what I mean. If they have multiple tunes, they won't have to. We'll make it so you don't have to do that. But if we get to the portal, that character won't get deleted. You know what I mean? Or none of your characters will get deleted. And so we may introduce like convenience, like you buy like a protected crystal to store your soul in case that happens, like for like $3, $4, $5 or something. And I think that's something that's like very fair in terms of if that ever happens. That way, let's say you're on vacation and the server, you'll get a notice definitely ahead of time, like maybe 1 week, 2 weeks prior to this event happening. Like then you can kind of prepare for it, and let's say you're on vacation, you can kind of just buy that item and apply it to your character, and you're good. You don't have to run to the point now. You know what I mean? And I think that's a really good form of convenience. Uh, and that's if it happens. And then after that, we'll have other forms of convenience in the form of like food. Food will make it so buying food will be able to you'll be able to buy like a picnic and then a one-time use $1 picnic that you can kind of drop for everybody, and they're able to like eat at it and then grab an item from it. And we want to promote these kind of social aspects within the cash shop, so that way when you buy something from the cash shop, you can kind of like don't feel bad about it, but like feel good, and then kind of meet people or use it to like interact with the community. And that's what we wanted with the cash shop. We didn't want it to like where our main source of revenue, hopefully, I don't think it will be the cash shop, but definitely be the number of sales in the game. I think would be our main source of revenue, and then the cash shop will kind of just be like the after extra to kind of help us keep the game running. And with that being said, we may introduce costumes as well in the future, and if we do, it'll be like $7, $8 for a costume, and then we may even introduce like a way where if you buy it $7, $8 for a costume, you get an extra pair to give to a friend or something, and that kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. And
So yeah.
yeah, all right.
That's our our plans for monetization. In the future, we're open to the idea of free to play, and we may introduce some kind of like trial system, referral system or something. So we'll figure that out. But for now, that's going to be definitely on the back burner until after we've established everything else and gotten the game rolling and to a state where we're very confident in it, and then we can make it free to play. Because if we made it free to play right away, I don't think it'll go anywhere. Because first off, we wouldn't be able to get the game to where we'd like it to be if we made it free to play.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And so, and with that, I think that's good. Do you want to sort of lay out release dates, sort of like a roadmap for Astaria for anybody who's interested?
Yeah. Give me one sec here. Yes. The thing about it is, first off, we actually just uploaded a roadmap to the Discord. It'll be on the website when that's up. We'll have um, another thing is I think a lot of people have a lot of questions uh, about parts of the game that need to be that they have questions about. Example is like crafting. A lot of people don't know about the crafting because detailed information readily available about it. So in the coming weeks, especially this month, we're going to try and lay out almost every information about the game possible on both the website, Discord, and maybe videos about it, explaining it with me, I guess, narrating about what we're planning to do here and there, to kind of touch on how I guess the design philosophy behind the game is and certain detailed aspects of it. Because I do know that a lot of people see the game, they're like, "Oh man, it sounds really cool," but there's no detail. It's indie, it's like, "Oh man, I don't know." So if we kind of put this information out there, it'll help a lot. Yes, and that plus with the roadmap, the release date is looking like the 12th for early access anyway. Potentially maybe push back. We're not sure yet. Again, originally at first, actually this weekend we're really confident, but now we're kind of like hitting a couple issues with the website, and we're like, I don't know if we want to do it yet. We'll see. And then there will be a public stress test on the Tuesday and Wednesday. Monday we'll have a updated client out to try and help stress test the servers. With that being said, by June, I want to say in June 2019, this year, in a couple months, by the end of June, we'll have the liberation, like a base form of the liberation system out. If not, then probably push back to, I want to say, July. And then by I think September, we'll then roll out what we call the community update. We're focusing on entirely on quality of life changes, optimizations, everything that has to do with the UI, just everything in general that has to do with like player experience for that. And we'll also let the community vote on what they'd like to see added for that month. That way, we kind of listen to community. Maybe by then they'll have enough time to play and test the liberation system and kind of give us feedback on what feature they'd like added. Like we had feedback on a party finder system, and so we decided to actually add that into August's roadmap update. So a lot of these roadmap updates are actually ideas from the community itself already. But we just wanted to see what players thought about by September and add a community update. Then by I want to say 2020 February, we're looking at exiting alpha/early access and going into beta launch. I think by beta launch will be a full-fledged game, and at that point it's just bug testing and just bringing out content expansions and such. And everything should be working, websites running, everything should be running smooth by 2020 February. That's our goal. If not, obviously push back, push early. We'll see what happens.
All right, and if there's anything you want to say to anybody who might be interested in picking up Astaria, what would that be?
Yes, sure. Oh, definitely. First off, I want to say thank you. I really appreciate it, and I definitely want to I definitely understand the frustration of the current MMO market, and that's why Astaria has been born because of it. So I definitely understand the frustration of the lack of decent MMOs. And with that being said, the game is going to be in a buggy state. I really cannot stress this enough, and I really wish uh, everybody understood this. It's going to be buggy. It's going to get broken, and maybe it might not even be fun right away. But I want everybody to understand that, like, bear with us. What we've accomplished so far is already, I guess, hard enough and was difficult enough. And what we accomplished so far is pretty amazing on the fact that, like, server infrastructure, client syncing, trading, combat, all that is like really hard to accomplish. And so where we're at right now, we're confident that we can start having people test it. And with that, allows us to get feedback, fine tune it, and then push out the main features, and then you'll kind of start to see the game become a really good game. So if it's not a good game right away after you buy it, trust me, I want you to bear with me that we're gonna support the game and make it a good game as best we can. And if you in the future ever want to voice your frustration about the game, feel free to do so. And I'm 100% going to read every single comment review as much as possible and give a serious take on it. So, and I think that as a developer, it's important for me myself to do this instead of having somebody else do it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you for coming on and clearing up anything that might have been nebulous about the game.